equity and equality because it's a more vital topic. So I don't know how to do it, but I'll try. I'll go very, very quickly without elaboration. To start with, we need an introduction, the conceptual foundation, or the belief foundation for the Muslim to be motivated to research and contribute the ideas about the Creator, human nature, and the position and purpose of creation. What are we here for this earth for? I might have one slide, very quick one, actually, on references in the Quran that clearly encourage people to study and learn and explore the universe. And then in the example, I might go faster, perhaps, just maybe a few selected ones. What I'd like to say in the introduction, that many Western historians do not disagree that it was Islam and the huge contribution to civilization by Muslims over a period of 6.5 centuries, where they were the most prominent in learning and scientific discoveries all over the world. A reference to that is a Western reference, in fact, the multi-volume work of George Sarton, S-A-R-T-O-N, called Introduction to the History of Science. There are other historians also who said that it was the contribution of Muslims that indeed was responsible for sparking the Renaissance in Europe. But unfortunately, there was time also, like any other civilization, when Muslims deviated from their faith and they became at the end or the tail of human civilization. But that wasn't the case for many, many centuries. Many historians say that this was because of the new spirit of research, discovery, reflection, even experimentation. They started experimentation centuries before George Bacon was credited with this. During that period, of course, there must have been a strong motive, because Muslims did not have anything to offer before Islam. So in fact, it was the teaching of Islam that resulted in motivating them so that they became leaders in science. Indeed, when they tried to follow its spirit. But this involves what we call worldview. Every human being, even an atheist, have a worldview. Is there such thing as God? What is my nature as a human being? What's my function here on earth? How do I understand the universe at large and the specific world or planet Earth on which I'm living? And here, I'll just briefly give you the Islamic answer to this, because it is at the heart of contribution to civilization, in my view. First, when we speak about God, we speak about absolute form of monotheism, that God is one as the Creator, the only one to be worshipped, and God one in person also. The Islamic monotheism is quite strict in its definition. Oneness of God implies oneness of the core divine messages given to all of the prophets, and that's why there are parallels, not because they copied from one another, but because the source of divine revelation is the same one God, and as such we find similarities in the teaching in the Hebrew scripture, in the New Testament, as well as the Quran. It implies unity of human race because they're all created by the same one God. Unity of all aspects of life, and Islam is quite comprehensive. It deals with all aspects of life rather than having artificial division and inconsistency in a person's life. Unity between the present and future, because Muslims, like their fellow people of the book, especially Christian, believe also in the day of resurrection and punishment and reward in the hereafter in some form or the other. So that's the question of God. Human nature is presented in the Quran as a composite of, above all, of course, physical. It starts from maybe from low to high. The Quran represents the human as a physical being who had his or her basic needs, and that is necessary for survival after all. But also the human being is distinguished over animals, for example, who might have intelligence but not intellect or the ability to engage in complex reasoning. But what makes the human even more important or closer to God is the spiritual element in the human, represented in the Quran with the divine breath, نَفَخَ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِهِ, that Allah breathed into every human. Something of His spirit means the pure, innate nature that is always inclined to reflect, did someone create me? How do I relate to Him? The purpose of creation is to worship God, but in Islam, worship of God is not limited to rituals. You are worshiping God here, in fact, if you think of it. If you're doing something for the sake of God and do it within the law that God prescribed, you're not engaged in something forbidden, then it is an act of worship if you really have that intention. It's a much broader concept of worship. The world is seen here as a place of test for us as human beings, and the Quran makes it clear that the human being is created as the trustee of Allah on earth. So all of us collectively, Muslims and other faith communities, are collectively also, as we are individually, the trustees of Allah. He is giving us all resources on earth to use it in order to fulfill the will of God, after which, of course, there will be consequence in the hereafter. The only condition, like I said, that, for example, whatever we acquire in a lawful, moral manner, use it in a moral manner. For example, in Islam, you are allowed, encouraged even, to have private property so long as you're paying the poor due, charity. Otherwise, it is available for you. There is no restriction. In a way, in the work itself is a form of worship. Now, I promise to have one quick slide. Here you find the first number in any of these is the chapter number or surah in the Quran, and after the colon, the verse. So I'm not speaking just to make fancy, unsubstantiated claims. I could spend all the time explaining this and quoting you these verses, but you can check them. And I leave a copy, inshallah, of the PowerPoint on the laptop here. You can put it on your website or provide it for anyone who wishes to go and check on me. I like that. But to put it very briefly, we find ayat or verses in the Quran that speak about encouraging us to use agricultural resources, water resources, fisheries and seafaring is mentioned in the Quran, animal resources and how to manage them properly and relate to animal world. The Quran invites us to reflect on the laws that Allah or God created in nature, the rotation of day and night, and the creation of heavens and earth. These are part of reflection on the Quran. The Quran also, as well as the hadith or saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there are lots of texts that speak about encouraging us to learn, and that the person who's seeking knowledge actually is close to Allah, and the universe would seek forgiveness even for him. Animals and seek forgiveness in their own way. In fact, the very first, for example, in Islam, you are allowed, encouraged even, to have private property so long as you're paying the poor due, charity. Otherwise, it is available for you. There is no restriction. In a way, in that work itself is a form of worship. Now, I promise to have one quick slide. Here you find the first number in any of these is the chapter number or surah in the Quran, and after the colon, the verse. So I'm not speaking just to make fancy, unsubstantiated claims. I could spend all the time explaining this and quoting you these verses, but you can check them. And I leave a copy, inshallah, of the PowerPoint on the laptop here. You can put it on your website or provide it for anyone who wishes to go and check on me. I like that. But to put it very briefly, we find ayat or verses in the Quran that speak about encouraging us to use agricultural resources, water resources, Fisheries and seafaring is mentioned in the Quran. Animal resources and how to manage them properly and relate to animal world. The Quran invites us to reflect on the laws that Allah or God created in nature, the rotation of day and night, and the creation of heavens and earth. These are part of reflection on the Quran. The Quran also, as well as the hadith or saying of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, there are lots of texts that speak about encouraging us to learn, and that the person who's seeking knowledge actually is close to Allah, and the universe would seek forgiveness even for him. Animals and seek forgiveness in their own way. In fact, the very first revelation that came to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, in the cave of Hira outside of Mecca was, guess what? Iqra, the very first word revealed in the Quran, read or recite. Speak about the pen twice. So the function and importance of learning, even in the spiritual sense, is very highly respected in Islam. The experimental method, I mentioned that earlier, that many people say Raja Bacon was the one who introduced it. Actually, many centuries before him, it was the very famous Muslim physicist in the West. It's known as Al-Hazen, and actually his proper name in Arabic, Al-Hasan ibn al-Haytham. Inshallah, that will become, when we took a very quick look at the contribution in various fields. So actually can trace the experimental methods right even to the Quran before Al-Hazen. So we're talking here about the 7th century of the Common Era. Now, when we deal with contribution, I have only one slide just to put things in terms of historical perspective. When we speak about Muslim contribution to science and civilization, what kind of timeline are we talking about? Most historians would say that it began to flourish, in the late part of the 7th century. That is the century in which the Prophet Muhammad finished his message, and he died in 632. So we're talking about just maybe a couple of decades after the Prophet, we find a beginning of a scientific and learning development. However, Western and Eastern scholars, for that matter, do not, because these are historical issues, that the real golden age of Muslim contribution to science and civilization lasted for about 5 centuries during the so-called Abbasid dynasty or caliphate, which began about 750 and ended in 1258 with the ransacking of Baghdad and the ending of the Abbasid Caliphate. So from beginning to end, this was a huge area of contribution. In Muslim Spain, it began about the same time like the Abbasid period, but as you know, Muslim power and contribution continued in Spain for a few centuries toward the very end, really, of the 15th century. After that, of course, you know what happened, the Inquisition and other destruction that took place. During this period, whether in Spain or in the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, which is now the capital of Iraq, and other places, you find historical evidence of many schools, libraries, endowments, scholarships, bursaries, and many of the caliphs, in fact, were famous of patronizing science. And they did not distinguish between Muslims and others. I mentioned the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, in Cordoba, and other major cities in Spain. You find that Muslim scholars and scientists, alongside with Christians, Jewish, Magian, everybody had their own faith that was left aside, but all of them were working cooperatively, not only to preserve the Greek classics, but to contribute originally to many areas of knowledge. That's really amazing when you look at it, but we look only at a few because of the limited time. That was at the time of so-called Dark Ages, but it was Dark Ages for Europe only, but not over around the Muslim world. Sometimes there is some Eurocentrism, as if Europe is not the world. Actually, there was parallel to the Dark Ages of Europe there was very, very luminous progress that unfortunately a lot of that has been destroyed because of religious fanaticism and wars and so on that took place later on. But we'll leave that aside. But many Western scholars are honest enough to say that insufficient credit was given to the huge and immense contribution of Muslims to civilization. Some of them even accuse others later on to have plagiarized. You know, in Germany, something like that happened recently. You know, that they actually took the inventions of Muslims and attributed to themselves. We call it plagiarism in academia. But let's see some examples. In astronomy, they were able to make catalog maps of visible stars, corrected the moon table. They were the first to use the pendulum and build observatories. They invented the sundial, the first timepiece ever to be developed, predicted sunspots, eclipses, and the appearance of comets. In chemistry, they discovered the nitric acid, described the processes of distillation, sublimation, filtration, coagulation, and crystallization as early as, guess, the 8th century. They described the properties of the sulfuric acids in the 8th century, and they were practical. They tried to use that for the benefit of humanity. For example, the processes of distillation of water, plasters, ointment, tampering of steel. Many terms in English now for chemical compounds are actually from Arabic names. Alcohol is exactly this, as it sounds in English. Elixir, alkali, syrup, all come from origin. There are a huge number of this, but I'm just trying to be as brief as possible. In mathematics, they popularized the Arabic numbers, and that's why the Arabic, still until today, is called Arabic numerals, which is far different concept from the cumbersome Roman numbering system. Now it made it possible, and now the computers that we have today owes part of that to the Muslim discovery in popularizing the Arabic number, which made it possible to manipulate numbers with a great deal of ease. Algebra comes from the Arabic term al-jabr, which literally means put the pieces together. You know, when you look at equations. They were the first actually to present algorithm. Algorithm actually comes from the name of Al-Khwarizmi. You can see the similarity in the sound. Al-Khwarizmi was a great Muslim mathematician of the 9th century. They had lots of research and contribution to non-Euclidean geometry. They were the first to use sine and cosine and develop trigonometry and spherical trigonometry and trigonometry of tangents. These are highly advanced fields, and that again took place sometimes in the 13th century or thereabouts. In physics, I mentioned earlier Ibn al-Haytham of the 11th century. How many centuries before Roger Bacon? George Sarton, a Western historian of science, actually he praises him so much, and he says that he had a very sharp eye, not to do science like the Greek science that did not distinguish between philosophy and experimental science. He was very experimental, and actually he speaks about making assumptions, observation, collecting data, testing the assumptions. But his most important contribution was to the science, what we call the modern science of optics, and he corrected the Greek mistaken theory as to how vision takes place. They investigated hydrostatics, improved the use of water wheels, which was very smart, simple way to get the water from lower land to upper areas. They made tables of specific gravities of liquids. I leave geography, but suffice to say that Christopher Columbus, to whom the discovery of North America was credited, actually he learned and was guided to North America by the work of an earlier Islamic scholar, Ibn Rushd, who lived in Andalusia, or what's now is Spain, as early as the 12th century. Actually, he wrote a letter to one of his friends that said it was the work in geography by Ibn Rushd that led him to the discovery. There are some people even who claim that Muslim came to North America long before Christopher Columbus, missions that were sent from Africa, in fact, during Muslim science. There is a book actually on that. It's called Deeper Roots by Dr. Abdul Halim. His name, not Abdul Halim. Subhanallah, sometimes the name just escaped me. It's available. It's called Deeper Roots. Okay. There are also many geographers who wrote about geography, and surprisingly enough, long before Europe realized that the earth is spherical in shape, some were actually speaking about that long time before. Look at the Caliph al-Ma'mun in Baghdad, who actually measured or estimated. He was a caliph and a mathematician also, geographer. He measured the circumference of the earth. The word circumference means that he understood it to be spherical in shape, and he estimated at 24,000 miles. The most accurate estimate today is within 1,000 miles, which shows again how much they had of advances. There are similar contributions, but again I have to quickly. In agriculture, they introduced many fruits to Europe. So some of the things that we have today, like bananas, peaches, and even the word sugar come from sukkar in Arabic, rice, ruz. So we owe some of the delicious things we enjoy today that they brought it to in industry. They had lots of advances in the various fabrics, types of fabrics like silk, cotton, and wool, leather. Even manufacturing of glass, steels, drugs, perfumes. Amazing. Even the word ream in English, ream of paper, it's come from rizma, actually an Arabic term. Actually, the paper was discovered in Baghdad towards the end of the 15th century. In commerce, it is amazing that they used what we call today checks, some system of checks in their own times. Even letter of credits for those who understand the meaning, and import, export, they have their own way of doing that. They were excelled so much in trade that at one time in the Canton port in China, there was as much as 500 ships docking there, which shows the immense involvement. I leave aside history. History has no future, but there are scholars who wrote like sort of chronicle of history, some until their time, like At-Tabari in the 9th century, some until the 13th century, but lots of work in which they collected immense amount of information. In art and architecture, you find that when Muslims went to various countries, like Jean Esposito, a good Catholic himself in his book, Islam, The Straight Path, he says that when Muslims went, they didn't go like invaders, empire builders, destroying the culture and heritage of other people. But they were discerning. Whatever agreed with Islam, did not contradict it, they encouraged. Whatever did not agree, they didn't adopt it, but they didn't prevent people from continuing to practice their own culture. And this you find until today. Historical mosques all over the Muslim world, or today even, you find that there is harmony. There is something that unites them that came from Islamic concept. For example, when you go to a mosque, you don't find icons or statues or any images or something that divert you from prayer or might be akin to idol worship, even though it not be intended. So this is common among all mosques. But you look at the design of mosques in India, it has its distinct flavor of the culture. In Turkey, you know, in Europe, for example, different countries, even in China, I've seen pictures of mosques in China, have something similar with other Muslims, but has its unique touch. And that's the beautiful notion of integrating all races and colors and cultures. Culture could be enriching, not something to suppress and impose from above your own culture. Okay, but a lot of this, of course, was destroyed during the various periods of conflict in history. Something remained for some of you who went to Spain, to the palace of Alhambra, and which, by the way, is Al-Hamra in Arabic, which means red, and Cordoba. But one of the fascinating things that was discovered is a cathedral door, Christian building. And in the middle of that door, it has the word or sentence, Ma sha Allah, which is an Arabic term that Muslims use, which means as Allah wills. A very interesting merging even of interfaith relations. What is more fascinating, I think it was Philip Hitty who mentioned that they discovered an Irish cross from the 9th century. You know, the Irish cross have the middle center, and then you get the shape of the various four arms. In the middle of that cross, it says Bismillah, which is the Arabic term meaning in the name of Allah. What an amazing, I don't know whether these guys realized what they were putting, but maybe they liked the calligraphy also of it. I'll escape on political science. They have also lots of contribution, and move directly to a few contribution in medicine, which is a huge subject worthy of a separate presentation in itself. But we must say, first of all, that the greatest physician in the world at that time were Muslim physicians, and mostly in Baghdad, which was a big center for development in medicine. Some of the early Muslim writers wrote or contributed to such issues as gynecology, obstetrics, ophthalmic surgery, and others, like almost encyclopedic work. They wrote about smallpox, which was translated into other languages like Hebrew and others up until the 18th century, which goes back even to the 9th century. In the area of pharmacology and pediatrics, again, we find Muslims had immense contribution, and their work were used in European schools of medicine for many centuries after even they were written. Probably in the West, the most well-known name among scholars is Avicenna, which in Arabic Ibn Sina, who was an amazing scholar writing in medicine, an amazing physician as well. And his works, again, were translated into Latin and Hebrew. Now Muslims translate from English to Arabic. That shows, again, the advancement, because you translate from a language that has rich heritage into your own language, which might be lacking at the time. Even in surgery, the greatest surgeon in the Middle Ages, especially in the 15th century, was a man called Abu Qasim. There is also Ibn Rushd that we mentioned earlier, Averroes. He was not only a sociologist and a political scientist, amazingly also, he had very sophisticated sections of brains, and he was actually a surgeon apparently, because some of the discovered drawings were drawings of medical or surgical equipment. There were others similar to that, but I just want to conclude by saying something about the hospitals. Amazingly, as early as the 8th century, you get very sophisticated hospitals. People come to the hospital, they have a wing for men, one for women. Complete, self-sufficient, which means there were lots of women physicians, women nurses. In the entrance of the hospital, the patient coming is examined. If his case does not justify admission, they're giving some medication and they're sent home. If it is decided that they need, they're asked to take a shower, leave their old clothes, and giving new clothes. And we're talking here about the 8th century, okay? And then they go there, they get the treatment, best treatment available, and by the way, all free, no medical insurance, expensive medical. Even visitors were allowed. That's a humanitarian role that the hospitals. Now, the care of the patient was not only physical. Some Muslims donated money for a trust fund so that a couple of people will go to visit hospitals and pretend that they're talking to one another. Say, look at his face, he looks much better today. Oh my goodness, he was really advancing. Just to raise. Some of them made funds or trust for people to go to play music or sing in order to entertain the patient. It was so good in terms of air and water circulation that people sometimes who don't have a place to go, they go to the hospital and pretend to be a patient, and they're complaining of this or that, until doctors understood that. And after 3 days, in Arabic culture, if you're coming as a guest, you're entitled for free support for 3 days, and then you're on your own unless your host. So the doctor once came to one of those pretenders to be sick. After 3 days, I said, well, the 3 days are over. I know why you're here, but 3 days is enough. Make room for someone. The 3 days of hospitality. They have a good signal if a person really is convalescent. If he's able to eat 1 chicken and 1 loaf of bread. I don't know how big the chicken at that time were or the loaf of bread, but you know, this is scientific. We are told by physicians that sometimes when a person begin the process of convalescence, now their appetite, it happened with me, it happened with you, I suppose, that you get your appetite back. So that was not a bad scientific signal if he's able to eat that chicken and that loaf of bread. In any case, they were also not only stationary hospitals, but if people can't come to the hospitals went to them. And amazingly, during various periods, especially the Seljuk period, you get a caravan of camels loaded with medicine, food, having doctors and nurses going in the outlying areas that are deprived of enough physicians to look after them. This was an amazing, sometimes it was as many as 40 camels, full hospital, you know, with all the needs. In conclusion, then, definitely the worldview of Islam that was described. How do you see yourself and your mission on earth? How do you see the continuity of your life even after death? And if you do good now, you're not only rewarded here, you're rewarded in the life hereafter. Your vision of the universe, your vision that getting close to God means also to be advanced scientifically. When people really did that, they have really excelled. But that's no consolation for Muslims today that don't just keep capitalizing on your past contribution, but compete now and here also to the benefit of humanity at large. That is the first topic, and I couldn't do it any faster than that, so forgive me. You want to continue then with the issue of gender, or you're tired already? All right. We'll be as concise as possible also. You know, in this picture, I love it. This belongs to some of my grandchildren, but if you look at the picture, really you notice that girls seem to be more mature. Boys are also monkey business and clowns. But that's scientific too, you know, girls mature earlier than boys. Anyway, first of all, we'll talk about one introduction and methodology and understanding what true Islam say about women, not cultural practice that could be un-Islamic. So we'll try to clarify the methodology. And then the main presentation basically is to examine the equity and equality issue of men and women in Islam from these 4 categories: spiritual and human, economic, social, legal and political, and a brief conclusion. To start with, we must distinguish between the teaching of Islam and actions of Muslims. We must distinguish between the teaching of Jesus and the action of some Christians, which included the Crusade and the Inquisition, but that's not his teaching. We must distinguish between the true teaching of Moses and what some Israelis did in their invasion of Gaza, killing children deliberately. We cannot say this is Judaic. We cannot say that Crusade or Inquisition is truly Christian, nor can any act of Muslims or claim to be Muslim in targeting innocent people can be called Islamic. It is their action. And that is an impartial rule that I believe should be kept in mind. The faith from its original sources, properly understood, is the judgment and the acid test for anyone who claims to be a Muslim, Jew, or Christian for that matter. Fair enough? I was not just selectively doing it for the sake of Islam. So the teaching is the basis of evaluation. In the case of Islamic study, any field of Islamic study, we must distinguish between the primary sources which for the Muslim means revelation or revelatory sources. And for Muslims, number one and foremost is the Quran, which is believed to, and there are some evidence to that rationally also. I teach a course on the Quran this semester, lots of evidence, even scientifically for that, that it is verbatim the word of Allah, because the Quran contains information that Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, who 14th century ago did not know even how to read or write, nor was he living in a civilization that's advanced even by the measure of the time. There are things in the Quran that was revealed to him that only in recent centuries, sometimes even in this century, we are discovering more and more that there is no single statement about science in the Quran that can be proven false. That many new discoveries, including the spherical shape of the earth, which might have inspired Al-Ma'mun in the 8th century, actually it's clearly stated in the Quran. But that's another issue. We discuss it in our class with all evidence, quoting chapter and verse in the Quran and what modern science have concluded. But in any case, for the Muslims, it is the word of Allah verbatim, and that's the highest source. Next to that is the sound or authentic hadith of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, not the weak ones. The authentic and strong hadith that are proven to be really authentic by the scholars who specialized in that science. This is what really deserves to be called primary source. There are other sources, but only secondary to that, which even include the so-called ijma'. Even if you get unanimity, you can't get unanimity unless there is a basis for that in the Quran and hadith. But generally speaking, any act or any opinion, juridical opinion or interpretation, it's the opinion of a human that is fallible. We don't have a central authority in Islam, for example, like a pope, that whatever he says would be just as good as the text of the Bible. No. Every scholar after Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, even his own companions, unless they reported something the Prophet told them, we can look at their opinion, we can accept or reject based on reasoning and based on knowledge also of the Quran and Hadith. And that's very important, because some people may argue that not only there are some Muslims who don't abide by Islam and behave contrary to the teaching, there are also some scholars who were very much influenced by the cultural practice and the cultural atmosphere around them, that they took opinion that other scholars objected to in their times or in a later time. So it is open, provided you follow the proper methodology and you have your documentation from the Quran and the teaching of the Prophet, peace be upon him. And many of the rules of interpretation include such things as the historical context, the textual context, other texts in Hadith or Quran that shed light. So it's not just a haphazard type. It is a very scientific process of interpretation or critique of that interpretation. Then I'd like to clarify one thing, and I'll give you a reference not to gain any money or royalty. I don't take any royalty of any of my publications in print, in sound, in video. If I'm the sole author, I say everyone can take it, can copy it even, but not for commercial purpose. If you cover your cost, I don't take any royalty except the prayers of Muslims. I'd like to make that clear, because some people take my stuff and say copyright and they put their own organization. If I am sole author, I can tell you now, they're not justified. Many times they're printed without my knowledge even, and sometimes they charge high prices. Anything you can get from the internet or other places, including this book called Gender Equity in Islam. It's not a very big one. You can get it from a variety of sources. One is called www.jannah.org. Jannah, J-A-N-N-A-H. But even if you have .org, by the way, O-R-G. But you can get it also through Google or any other search engine if you give the exact title. And notice here, it is equity, not equality. Why? Well, equity actually is a broader and more just concept than equality. Because sometimes people take equality that everything you can do, we can do better. So between the gender, it's almost like war, gender war. You know, we must be equal in each and everything. And the answer to that is that yes, we are fully equal when it comes to our spiritual nature as men and women, when it comes to our moral obligation, when it comes to our religious obligation, whether within one religion or across religion, we are all 100% equally. When in terms of human dignity, we are 100% equal. But equity is a more sophisticated term. It goes beyond equality in each and every item to the overall justice. Overall justice. I give you a very simple example I mentioned in my book. I say that if I have in my pocket different currencies that comes all together or make up for, okay, you can help with that while I'm continuing, no problem. I think something. Oh yeah, I think that's the reason. Okay, so allow me just to get my purse. Yeah, I know. I should have remembered that. Somebody can help me with that so that I don't hold everybody. And here's the, okay. If I have in my pocket a number of currencies, American dollar, Canadian dollar, whatever, which according to the rates of exchange comes to an equivalent to, let's say, 1,000 euros. You don't have to have the same exact currency like I do. You could have in your pocket also the exact identical amount equal to 1,000 euros, but you don't have to have the same Canadian dollar like I do. I came from Canada. You get my point? So the totality is the same, even though some items are different. In the question of gender relationship, husband and wife, they are exactly equal in their humanness and all of this, but they have different duties that Allah created them for. Only woman can bear a baby. It doesn't make her superior or inferior to man. You get the point? So there are complementary, cooperative roles in the same way that in society, not everybody has to be a medical doctor or an engineer. You need all, but all together they make a functional family or functional society. There is no question here of an issue of superiority or inferiority for that matter. Let us now get to the first item in terms of spiritual and moral aspects. In the Quran, and the evidence I hope will be forthcoming, if you can get this again, if you can get gender equity, I hope it's still there, but if not, I'll have plan B or 2. Okay, any computer whiz? Okay, you can just get back to, it's called gender equity with pictures. So you can just go to my, you open the PowerPoint and with them. All right, when it comes to the question of spirituality, the Quran speaks about men and women as having been created from the same spirit, nafsin wahida. Secondly, in the Quran, and keep in mind this, I'm saying that in all frankness, I don't mean to compare for any negative purpose, but to show the truth of the Quran. In the Quran, nowhere does it blame woman for tempting Adam to eat from the forbidden tree. Nowhere. Nowhere. In fact, if you go to Surah 7, that speaks in some detail about the forbidden tree, on the surface, superficially, it looks like the Bible. In reality, it's not. Because throughout the talk about Adam and Eve and temptation, we find that it speaks in the dual language. In Arabic, you have singular, dual for the two, and plural. Always it says in the dual language, فَأَكَلَا, they both ate. They both sought forgiveness from Allah. And by the way, as a result, there is no concept of original sin at all that can be traced to the Quran. They made a mistake as human beings because Allah created them like that. The Quran says they sought forgiveness, they regretted that. Allah, out of His mercy and justice, knowing their weakness as humans and appreciating their repentance, no problem at all, He forgave them. So there is no concept of original sin. Another point, not only is woman not blamed for eating from the forbidden tree, and those of you who are familiar with comparative religion can appreciate more what I say. The suffering of women during pregnancy and childbirth, which is taken in other forms of theologies to mean a reminder of her sin and a punishment for tempting man. And since tempting man is not there, a problem for women, it follows that pregnancy and childbirth No, that's the wrong one. If you get, it's called gender equity. Okay, it follows from then that she carries no responsibility for that. But the Quran goes beyond that. It goes beyond that. Actually, there is a verse in the Quran that says we have commanded, we hear the royal language of God speaking, or commanded humankind to be parent to his or her parents. حملته أمه وهنا حملته أمه كرها ووضعته كرها. Because his mother, why you should show more respect to the mother? Because she bore you in pain and gave birth to you in pain. So the same identical items of pregnancy and childbirth pains are presented in the Quran as a reason to adore the mother even more and more. This is rather amazing when it comes to that issue. Of course, like I think we almost finished with that. But there is one thing here that I'd like to clarify. A myth, even among some Muslims. Even I find that some scholars did not notice this in the Quran. When they claimed that according to the Quran, man is superior to woman. There is no single text in the Quran that says that. Unless it's mistranslation, misunderstanding, or both. No verse in the Quran say that one gender, neither woman is superior to man, nor man is superior to woman. And what they mistakenly refer to, I'll come back to, which is the responsibility of man to provide for his family. We'll talk about that a little bit. In fact, there is evidence in the Quran that there is absolutely no superiority, whether it is gender or national or racial or whatever, except by piety and being a righteous person. That appears in Surah 49, verse 13, Inna akram, at the end of the verse, Inna akramakum indallahi atqakum. The most the closest of you to God, the most noble you in the sight of God is who? The one who's most righteous, which is a very fair competition for all. It's a myth to speak about superiority of one or the other. Now, I give you other examples. These were examples, like I said, if you look at the previous one, I put it under the title, example of full, not equity, equality. Equality. The spirit of a man and woman is the same spirit. Morality of a true man or a woman or spirituality is the same for both. So this I could call exactly the same. Equality even. But there are also examples of full equality. One of which you hear in the media, Islam consider a woman as worth half of man because women always inherit half of the share of man. That is discrimination, that is demeaning. But is it? Is it? Well, to start with, there is a challenge to that statement. The law of inheritance of Islam has nothing to do with gender in itself. Some might get shocked at that. It doesn't have anything to do with gender itself, in itself. In fact, if you go to the Quran, you will find that there are cases where male and female inherit exactly the same. You will be finding cases where a female may inherit more than male. There are cases where a female inherits and another relative male does not inherit. And one case, and I'll come to that, where, for example, when they're exactly equal, like brother and sister, the brother takes twice the share of the female. And that's where we extend the question of equity. But the statement, a categorical statement that it's based or predicated on gender is totally false. Not only my statement, by the text of the Quran. Those who are interested in that, who can read Arabic, there is a book that is written recently by Dr. Salah Sultan. It's known in the Quran, was known before, but he went into some depth. Dr. Salah Sultan is a professor of Sharia, and he says that the title of his book actually is امتياز المرأة على الرجل في الميراث. The cases where women have even greater claim on inheritance than men. If it is not then based on gender exclusively in itself, what is it based on? And why did I make that definitive statement? It is not based exclusively on gender at all. The reason that is raised is that law of states or inheritance Islam, it depends on a number of issues, one of which is the financial, and that's the most important one, the financial responsibility according to Islamic family law of male and female. That's one. That's the most important. Secondly, it is predicated also on closeness to the deceased. If a daughter of someone who died, for example, and she has brothers also, so if a daughter is there, that would not permit the brothers of the deceased to inherit anything. So here the case where a male who is reasonably close to the deceased, his brother, does not inherit, whereas the daughter inherits, if there are also other brothers with her. So there are numerous examples of that case. So closeness to the deceased, as well as the financial responsibility according to Islamic law. Now let me get to these cases where the brother inherits, for example, more than his sister. Number one, according to Islamic law, I'm not talking about other cultures, according to Islamic law, number one, women have every right to acquire and control their property before marriage and after marriage. But then they have additional inequalities in their favor, additional advantages over males. How comes that? Suppose you get a man and woman getting married and they have exactly the same assets. Even before marriage, she is on the receiving side, man was on the payment side. During engagement, he is the one who gives gifts. I'm not saying she can't, but the obligation is on the husband to pay the gift. If she gets married, her entire property remain under her own control and he has no access to a penny. Do you know that in Britain, which was more advanced in the 19th century than any other European countries, a woman could not own property independently. And either it transfers to her husband, and sometimes that's why you get Mr. and Mrs. Taking after the name of the husband. Either the property transferred to her husband, or he has control that she cannot dispose of her property without his permission. It was only in 1870s where a series of laws or acts called Married Women Property Act, for the first time in Europe, gave women the right, an entity, as a legal entity, to negotiate anything in her property, whether she's married or not. And that was 13 centuries after the Quran established that basic right for women. And then, it's not only the gifts during engagement. Islam also requires that when you get married to a woman, you have to pay a marital gift, known as mahr. Has nothing to do, by the way, the concept of purchase price. I read it in some other encyclopedia. Nothing to do with this. It described the Quran as nihla in Arabic, which means free gift. Free gift. And while Sharia is flexible, it doesn't put any minimum or maximum for marital gift. No, normally a person would give a gift, not too miserly. You could not be a millionaire, for example, and give a gift, a free lunch or dinner or something of that nature. Normally, it is substantial enough. Here is an inequality in favor of whom? Not male, female. Then even if the wife is richer than her husband, only the husband is fully financially responsible for her own needs, whether it's food, clothing, housing, entertainment, medication. It is fully in Islamic law, even if she's richer than he is. This is inequality. But in whose favor? Then, if divorce takes place and part of the marital gift was deferred, delayed, it becomes due to the divorced wife if he's the one who initiating divorce. So it has to be paid and take claim. If he dies even before the divorce become effective, because there is a waiting period, then it has a claim, priority claim on his estate. With that, if she works during their marital life in Islamic law, she does not have to pay him a penny, unless that's something negotiated or agreed between, because he has to consent also to that. So if she works, it is her property until she willingly contributes, for example, to the household. There is no legal obligation. Doesn't this inequalities in favor of women? just matched by one letter, by one inequality in favor of male, that is a higher share. Take that brother and sister. She inherited 1 million, he inherited 2 million. Her million will keep increasing, and she can invest it, and if she get married, it keep increasing. Plus, if she works, additional to the revenue she gets from investment of her property, she also can keep that for her own use. Her brother take 2 million, and then he have to pay another woman for engagement, to pay another woman. So still, the female is still on the more advantageous. He has to pay to another woman a marital gift. He had to support another woman and support all the children from that woman or otherwise. And she can keep increasing, and poor man keep decreasing. I say that not sarcastically. Dr. Hamouda Abdul Ati, in his doctoral dissertation that is published now under the title Family Structure in Islam, quotes a non-Muslim, a sociologist probably called Damon Bain, writing in the late 50s. But he's writing with integrity because he studied rather than take the propaganda that Islamophobes keep spreading about how Islam demeans women. That fellow, non-Muslim as he may be, had the integrity to say, he says, if Western women only understand what financial privileges and guarantees security, financial security, Islamic law gives to Muslim women, they would envy them for that. So again, this is the notion of proper methodology, not propagandistic things. When we really look at the total picture, not just pick and choose some items that may not be understood even by some Muslims. There is another example that I call elements of equity and equality. I could not put them definitively in one category or other. For example, before coming of Islam, some female infanticide used to be practiced. I heard the term recently, by the way, in terms of some forms of abortion. It is a form of infanticide. But that infanticide was directed specifically toward the female. The Quran considered that as a murder, as a crime like any other crime. And the word used in the Quran, قُتِلَتْ وَإِذَا الْمَوْءُودَةُ قُتِلَتْ, murdered, considered. And in fact, that practice actually owed its disappearance to the teaching of the Quran and prohibition of interference with the life. But then, this is one of my latest grandchildren. The Quran condemned even the negative feeling that some people had at the time of the Prophet, even because of the old rotten tradition, anti-female type of feeling. That the Quran says if one of them, meaning father, is giving the good news or the news of his wife giving birth to a female, meaning instead of a male, his face really looks very bad and he is very grieved for that. And the Quran even forbid that feeling. That is mean there are beautiful creatures of Allah, whether they are boys or girls. So that's amazing. Another example of both is when Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, teach that you should be kind to your children in general, yet he warns people because there was some wrong things that were going on. He warns people that they should be fair and just in treating their children. And actually, in one hadith, he says the one who had 2 girls and he raised them properly and respectfully, nicely, did not insult them, did not bury them alive like what they used to do. He says, he and I would be like this in paradise. The person would have the honor to be as close to the Prophet as these 2 fingers. Speaking about just being kind to daughters. So this is another issue again where, I don't know, there is element of equality, there is element of equity in favor of the female. Because in that hadith also, or in the narration of that hadith, another, it says, وَلَمْ يُؤْثِرْ وَلَدَهُ عَلَيْهَا. He raised her properly, even talking about one, and did not favor his son over her. He's very explicit. In that, there is amazing example. If people only, or those who claim to be Muslims, follow what the Quran they claim to believe in say. And then, of course, education. I might shock you. Somebody sometimes in a lecture like this asked me, tell me, do Muslim girls have right to learn? I said no. And I'm sure he must have been thinking, there goes another Taliban. I said no, they don't have the right, they have the obligation, according to the hadith of Prophet Muhammad ﷺ, to seek knowledge. They don't have the right, they have the obligation. Because the Prophet said seeking knowledge is mandatory on every Muslim. By the way, on the concept of equity, that was one of my daughter's way of presenting it, not based on male or female, but on height. Anyway, these are only a few of other. Marriage could be also regarded as an example where there are both elements of exact equality and equity. The Quran, for example, speaks about the mutual obligation of husband and wife by establishing 3 foundations for marriage: peace, love, and compassion. A Muslim girl has every right to reject marriage proposals that she doesn't wish, she doesn't want to. You talk about feminism. I'll tell you something that happened 14 centuries ago. A girl came to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and she said, my father pressured me to marry someone because that fellow is a big shot, so the status of the father would be elevated. So the Prophet immediately say, okay, if you don't like it, we can annul that marriage. She said, no, Prophet, peace be upon him. No, Prophet. Maybe she liked that guy after all. She said, I happen, and now I agree with what my father did. In other words, he turned out to be a good guy. I know what my father did. The question here, why did she go and complain in public if she loved that husband, after all? But she said, but I came here so that other women know that their parents cannot force them to marry someone they don't like. And you talk about feminism, 14th century ago. Of course, feminism can be interpreted in a variety of ways, but if we mean by feminism restoring the right and dignity of women, there's no problem with that. Not necessarily various forms of feminism that get into different direction from that. Coming to the issue I promised to come to, that there is no superiority, and misunderstanding arose when the Quran speaks, الرجال قوامون على النساء. Actually, قوامون come from the Arabic قام على الشيء, responsibility, meaning, and this was, by the way, was a good translation by Abdullah Yusuf Ali. He translated قوامون, meaning they are responsible for the provision and protection of the family. Responsibility is not superiority. Responsibility, not superiority. Because a woman also is contributing, even if she's not working, and you got small babies and you're looking after them. This is an immense contribution, no less than your husband making $1 million a month. So what $1 million if you have children that nobody's looking after them, or looking after them the wrong way? And we all hear sometimes about the consequences of dependence on babysitting, or horror stories. It speaks also about marital disputes and how to deal with them with the least harm, weighing harms and benefits. Divorce is a myth also, and many would make an erroneous statement that only man can divorce. It is untrue. According to the Quran itself, women can also divorce their husband in a special form called khula, or divestiture, and it is there in the Quran, the first source of Islamic jurisprudence. Muslims, scholars also, on the basis of the Quran and the teaching of the Prophet, actually say that if a woman really doesn't like her husband, and he did not do anything wrong to her, because if he did, she can go to court and get the marriage annulled or terminated by a ruling, whether the husband likes it or not. But in case that she somehow, hate to continue to live with him for good, righteous reason, but she doesn't want to spread dirty linen before everybody else. In that case, all that is required is to return the marital gift, if it's still there, because there is no fault on the husband. He didn't do anything or not accused of anything. She can make this compensation and she can go again free on her own and remarry. And there is no hang-up about remarriage, actually, of a Muslim woman. The custody of the children is often presented as biased toward men. It is wrong, 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 triple wrong. Actually, to sum up the law of custody, I described that in my book. The priority, according to the Prophet ﷺ, Prophet Muhammad, is that in the young age, and many scholars said probably would be about 6 or 7, automatically the mother take custody of the child. And then when the child reaches the age of about 6 or 7, they're asked if they want to continue in the custody of the mother or move to the custody of the father. Some scholars, based again on that spirit of Sharia or Islamic law, they say that if the child happened to be a female, a girl, she may be entitled to stay in the custody of her mother until either, in one opinion, she reaches puberty, or even some say until she gets married. And the argument here is that girl need the mother more than the father once she becomes adolescent, because they can get motherly guidance in that respect. But of course, it's honest to say that the law of custody in Islam takes into consideration and balance the interest of everybody, above all the child. Secondly, the custodial parent. Thirdly, the non-custodial parent, because he should have access also to the child, even if it's in the custody of the mother. And fourthly, of course, the interest of the child could mean also that a mother, for example, who is a drunkard, or a father for that matter, would not be fit. So you go next to someone else in the family. Something that really will surprise you, that if nobody is available, the father is dead, the mother is an alcoholic or whatever, or in jail for whatever reason, and then suppose you're left with 2 females. One is maternal grandmother and the other is paternal grandmother. What would you say about that? What is your guess? Who's entitled to take the child, or it doesn't make a difference? Flip a coin? They're both females. Islamic law say that the maternal grandmother take precedence of a paternal grandmother. Both are females, which shows again that the custody actually is weighed more in the right. And then we hear and read writing, not without my children, and all this type of stuff. Anyway, an example of both also is the question of polygamy. There is a big myth that some people think that polygamy and Islam are the twin that shall never separate. When I was doing my graduate study at Indiana University in the early 60s, and somebody asked, this is a very cosmopolitan campus, and somebody come, what's your name? I said, Jamal. Where did you come from? I said, Egypt. Okay. And then he asked me, what is the common religion in Egypt, if you don't mind? I said, Islam, I am a Muslim. You know what's the next question? How many wives do you have? It is a myth. I'll give you a reference here, Edward Westermarck, who gave evidence of this widespread polygamy, not only in various nations and cultures, but in the Hebrew scriptures. And he claimed that most of the Israelite prophets actually had more than one wife. Some had 100, like David, for example, or said to have had 100, which might be, of course, a sort of exaggeration. There are, even he says, even the friend of God, he quotes Martin Luther. He said, even the friend of God, Abraham, had 2 wives, Sarah and Hagar. So he claims also, that's Martin Luther, he said, in the New Testament, there is no single text there that in which Jesus, not Paul or any fellow, Jesus himself outlawed that practice. And then, knowing that in the Gospel according to Matthew, Jesus said, I came not to destroy the law or prophets, I came to fulfill, which means that anything that is not modified by Jesus, such as the concept of Sabbath, for example, is still a law in action. So from where this idea, the Arabs also used to have unrestricted polygamy. But the question here, is that something that is regarded in Islam as a norm? No. Definitely no. Because the sex ratio in the world today and in most countries is that males are almost nearly the same number like females. Perhaps maybe about 2 to 3 percentage points overall over males. And if that is an Islamic norm, then the sex ratio must be at least 2/3 female, so that even a person can have just a second wife. And if everybody wants to get 4, of course, the sex ratio would be 80% female and 20%. You know that they could not be. It is an empty argument to say this is the norm. The norm in Islam, and the norm that goes with human nature, because we know the jealousy and all of that, this is part of life. The norm is monogamy. Polygamy was left to deal with very accentuating circumstances when in wars, for example, past or present, you get a very large number of males being killed in the battlefield, leaving daughters who need men to get married to, widows who have still maybe small children to look after. Obviously, in that case, if they accept, and all parties, or at least the 2 parties involved, accept that, then perhaps it might provide a moral and more humane type of solution. But there is option for all parties, including the second one. So there is no automatic connection, unseparated or inseparable questions between. Example of both is kindness to parents. The Quran speaks about kindness to parents as next to worship of God. And some verses, like I quoted earlier, especially singles out the mother with greater care and love because of, again, the pains of pregnancy and childbirth, especially the mothers. And let me tell you what I call my favorite hadith. A man came to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and he said to him, who among all human beings, everyone, close or far, is most worthy of my love and kindness? The Prophet said, your mother. The man thought, maybe I ask about the next one, number 2. So he said, then who? And the Prophet said, your mother. He said, yes, I know who's third, even after that. He said, your mother. Only in the 4th time he said, and your father. You should not get jealous, fathers, because Allah knows what He revealed to the Prophet ﷺ. Mothers 3 times, father 1. 75% versus 25%. Or to put it in my favorite way, in Olympic terms, gold medal for the mother, number 2, silver medal for the mother, bronze medal for the father, and the mother, the 3 medals, gold, silver, bronze, and the father gets an appreciation certificate. All right. An example of both is when the Prophet ﷺ said that women are the twin halves of men. Some people translated akhawat, but there is another term in Arab for akhawat. Shaqa'iq, like split half. A more eloquent and revealing term of, if you have split half, which half is better? Which half is superior? It's a very interesting one. In some ahadith, he spoke specifically about respecting women. In one, he reproached those who insult women. He said, مَا أَكْرَمَهُنَّ إِلَّا كَرِيمٌ وَلَا أَهَانَهُنَّ إِلَّا لَئِيمٌ. It is only the person who is generous and good in character, who is respectful to women. It is only the one, the wicked person who insults women, for that matter. Then the question of modesty, hijab. Subhanallah. Modesty is found in the Hebrew scriptures. Some Orthodox practicing Jewish women cover their heads also exactly or about the same like Muslim sisters here are doing. Mother Teresa, the highly respected woman, covered her hair. Catholic sisters have their own habits also, which cover the body, including the head, in spite of the variations. In all of these cases, nobody raised any question. But only when a Muslim woman wears hijab, oppressed, some chauvinistic male forced her to do this. Subhanallah. You know, I'll tell you 2 stories, real ones that happened. My wife and I, she doesn't cover the face because there is dispute, there's no requirement that is definitive about it. She was just like our sisters here, had a scarf on it. And we were together in an interfaith function, and in the table, 10 people, 5 couples, just to get to know one another and so on. And here a lady looked at my wife with her head covered, and maybe she figured that poor woman married to such a tyrant must have forced her. So she said, Mrs. Badawi, what would you do if Dr. Badawi say it's okay to take off your hijab? And my wife snaps back, I divorce him. And she started to explain, I'm not doing that for my husband or anyone else, male or female. When I came to America first, we came together. I was wearing modest clothes, but even at that time, I didn't know and I wasn't as committed, but I didn't cover my hair. I decided here in America, not because I was affected by American culture. I decided it's counterculture, actually, to cover the head in the mind of many people. So she started to give her the explanation. The other one is really interesting, really, really interesting. The late Pope John Paul II, he was a very well-traveled pope, and he was very friendly, by the way, to Muslims also. Unlike his successor, more friendly, I'm saying, relative to that. And I hope the successor become more friendly also, and shed some of the ideas that might have affected him, wrong information apparently, especially when he claimed that the verse in the Quran that says, let there be no coercion in religion, is a verse that was revealed in Mecca when Muslims were weak. And this is definitively a Medinan revelation. Apparently somebody gave him the bad advice for whatever reason. Anyway, but he visited among the countries, he did our country in Canada. So he came also to Halifax. It's actually, Halifax is the major city in the so-called maritime area east of Montreal. And there was a huge number of people gathering there to listen to him before he gave his speech. So the streets were buzzing with people. And among the people, obviously, we came to greet the Pope and show respect, were various orders of nuns with different colors and so on. And my wife happened to have been passing. So one man looked at her and he said, maybe there's another category of nuns that I haven't seen before. So he goes to her and says, sister, which order of nuns do you belong to? And my wife said, none. None, N-O-N-E. Anyway, this is the kind of assumption, automatic assumption, that only women, Muslim women, if everybody covers, fine. If Muslim women cover, it is because of persecution, as if they are mindless, have no will, has no chance to decide on their own. In fact, some Muslim women complain to me that their husbands, Muslim husbands, are objecting to their cover. We don't speak about that. The counter pressure even. So as you find some extreme cases where a person pressured a wife to cover, there are also extreme cases where a husband objects to his wife covering, and oftentimes I advise them to be gentle, nice, but not to obey him, because obedience to God is above obedience to husband. If you're doing that as your commitment, stick to it, but try to kindly explain to him. The question of seclusion is totally different and contrary to what had happened at the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him. There is a good 6-volume work about women at the time of the Prophet, and many sound and authentic hadiths indicate that they were involved in all of the affairs of society. For example, Khadija, the wife of the Prophet, he was her business manager, she was the owner when he married her. And there are other examples of women contributing to social well-being, participating in political discussion in the mosque, helping even in the battlefield, defending Muslims and providing logistical help and support for them. First, and when we come to the legal thing and testimony of women, there is another big myth. Islam demeans women, again consider them half the worth of man, because there is a rule in the Quran that the testimony of 2 women is required for 1 man. Correct or incorrect? Incorrect. There is no such general rule in the Quran. And the way to approach it objectively is to put together all the verses in the Quran that deal with testimony before court of law. The majority of them do not speak about ratio of men and women. The majority. And to prove that there is no general rule whatsoever in the Quran that in all cases the women's testimony is worth half, is that there are verses in the Quran in chapter 24 which equates the testimony of men and women. Al-Li'an, some people know. Go and read it. Chapter 24, it's in the beginning of the surah. 4 testimonies, 4 testimonies. The husband claimed 4 things and swear 4 times, and the wife can swear 4 times, and again, there is no blame on the wife in that particular case. That in itself shows, in the Quran itself, that there is no such thing. But there is only one verse that some people keep quoting as an evidence of demeaning women, but they're picking, cherry picking. They don't look at the other verses. They don't look at the verses that equate testimony. They don't even look at the rest of the verse. They just quote one part of it. The verse itself that says that is strictly about financial contracts, to get testimony or witnesses on a financial contract. And let's give you some background. At the time of the Prophet, peace be upon him, it was men who were responsible for the providing for the family. There might have been some good business women like Khadija, but overall, women did look after the needs of the family, the children. They didn't have all the equipment they have, microwave, this and that. Cooking even would take so many times. So there was some kind of arrangement that they would take care of that, and the husband take care of earning, work hard to earn the living for the family. What are the consequences of most women not being engaged in business? What is the consequence? That their experience become less than that of man. And testimony must be accurate. It is in that context that the Quran says that when you have a contract, that means financial contract, you should look for two men witnesses. Why does it say men? Because normally it is men who would be attending this, because women normally would be home, caring for her children and society in different ways. But then it says if there are no 2 men available, then 1 man and 2 women of those that their integrity is not in question. Their integrity and knowledge is not in question. And then people cut it here to continue after that, because it says, because if one of them get confused, i.e. because of lack of experience in business, the other one would remind her. So to collaborate the testimony in that case. There have been scholars, including some contemporary scholars like Dr. Taha Jabir Alwan, who is also a senior professor of Sharia and one of the known scholars, and others, who said that the ultimate purpose of testimony is not in itself. In other words, you don't need witnesses for the sake of getting witnesses. Why do you need witnesses? To ascertain the accuracy of what happened, so that you don't penalize people financially because somebody didn't understand what was going on. So the ultimate purpose is justice, not procedure. And you don't destroy the objective because of insisting on a procedure that might have its own circumstances. And some said explicitly, and I was the one actually to ask that many years back to one of those senior scholars, because I had that belief, I wanted to collaborate. And I gave that question to one of the senior scholars. Well, suppose that other woman who was there was only 1 man and 1 woman. And that woman happened to be a graduate in business administration, majoring in finance, and understand business like this. And his answer, he said, it is the duty in Islamic law of the judge to establish both the credibility and knowledge of the witness. And if he judged that that woman understands better than any man, then the procedure cannot be insisted on or become a dogma, because justice can be done best by accepting her testimony. So this is a myth, again, that is very... There are other people who say, can women participate? I answered that already. There are 6-volume work that provide detailed hadith information about that. Leadership position is an arguable one anyway. And when people refer to the hadith of the Prophet, it spoke actually about a woman being the head of the whole Muslim ummah. And the head of the Muslim ummah is not like a symbol like a queen or whatever, effective power. That is the only one, and even then that hadith or a few hadiths on that subject has been debated as to what exactly they mean. But again, when we speak about leadership, and this is one of the fields I used to teach in management also, we're not talking about position, but influence. That's what real leadership is. It's not a position. And who can deny that a woman take leadership in her household? She's the one who raised her children and teach them good morals and good manners. So when we talk about leadership in its essence, rather than somebody has the title, women are leaders. And in fact, the Prophet ﷺ came very close to saying that in one hadith. He says, "Kullukum ra'in." All of you are responsible or questionable, meaning leaders. And each of you is responsible for his trust. And then he said, a man is a responsible person, a leader, and he's responsible for his household, i.e. provision, leadership, protection of the family. And then notice here, وَالْمَرْأَةُ رَاعِيَةٌ فِي بَيْتِ زَوْجِهَا وَهِيَ مَسْئُولَةٌ عَنْ رَعِيَّتِهَا. And the woman is ra'i, the exact title given to man, i.e. you could say, actually the closest thing to say, leader. And she's responsible also for her flock, her children, her house, her social work. And continued also to indicate that each one is ra'i, each one is a leader, if we take it in the broad sense, rather than, militaristic kind of hierarchy. With that, I come to a conclusion that indeed there is a gap between the ideal, the normative Islam based on these primary sources, understood properly according to the proper methodology, and the reality of Muslims. If Muslims are doing something wrong, unworthy, or discriminatory, it is their problem, not Islam's problem, any more than the Crusades is not the responsibility of Prophet Jesus, peace be upon him. When we speak about cultural diversity and people visit some Muslim country and they think that they became instant experts on Islam, they don't see as many women running around in the streets or in buses and say, oh, that's backward society, the women must be imprisoned behind. They don't realize that many women and many people here came from Muslim countries are very happy being at home actually and caring for their children and husband, even though they could be professional. I know in Canada, medical doctor even female, and she said, my children are the most important thing to me. I forget until they grow up maybe and can practice part-time. Who are we to tell them that you're oppressed if indeed they choose that? And many people look at the negatives in treatment sometimes, but then don't look at the positives, the cohesiveness of the family in Muslim countries. These are issues that one has to take it in fairness, even if you look at it from sociological or anthropological point of view. Last word, which is the last breath I have, actually is that I'm glad to say that having lived in the West and acted as a bridge somehow for, it's no secret, from 63 to now, so that's 48 years, both in the United States and Canada, promoting this idea since I was a graduate student, long time ago. So from the early 70s I began to write on that subject and research it. I can see that it is spreading, not because of me, I don't take any credit, but it happened to be in the time when other scholars also are much more learned than myself began also to write on the topic, giving me the comfort that I wasn't off track because I'm only a small student of knowledge, and also shows that that trend is spreading. It might take time to change attitudes of some Muslims. It might take some time to change the un-Islamic cultural Muslim practices. It's not a contradiction of term. Un-Islamic Muslim cultures that violate the teachings of Islam. But it is taking place and is growing, and I hope it continues in the future to remove that myth so that all of us as men and women will not look for superiority of one over the other, but look for piety, righteousness, complementarity of our roles for the sake and benefit of all the human race. May Allah bless you for all that patience, having two major presentations in one shot, which I know was taxing. My apologies. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you.